So this is work with folks at Colorado State University and also at the National Wildlife Research Center. We've been collaborating on this project. It's a pilot study to look at the use of Gonacon, which you've heard about, on prairie dog populations here in Colorado. So the data is pretty new. In fact, I finished prairie dog trapping on Friday, so it is very, very new. So to give you a little introduction for those of you who are coming from outside of Colorado, the Blacktailed Prairie Dog is one of 5 species in North America. This is the range map here on your right. It's kind of a Great Plains habitat, so from here eastwards you will find prairie dogs in some numbers. And it's kind of famous because it's a keystone species, so it modifies the environment that it lives in, creates different habitats for other animals. It is controversial in that some estimates suggest that it only is inhabiting 5% of its historic range. It has suffered a lot of population declines for various different reasons. It's also, for such a small, seemingly innocuous animal, an amazing lightning rod for political opinion. So if you travel from Boulder, the Republic of Boulder, eastwards through Wells County, you will get prairie dogs are the greatest conservation icon in the United States. They're wonderful because when you shoot them, you don't even have to pick them up. So, one of the reasons they're considered a keystone species is their importance to the black-footed ferret, which is a highly endangered carnivore in North America. Black-footed ferrets, it depends on estimates, will go from anything from 70 to 95% dependence on prairie dogs as their prey species. So without prairie dogs, you don't have any viable reintroduction programs or habitats for the black-footed ferrets. And similarly, burrowing owls, which in Colorado is under threatened conservation status, these use prairie dog burrows as their nesting sites. So without prairie dog colonies or viable prairie dog colonies, you have reduced viability for the burrowing owls. And this is from the Prairie Dog Management Plan, which I kind of was amused that you either need prairie dogs, the sciurids, or you can mow. So I prefer to just have the prairie dogs out there doing that for me. So these do seem to generate quite a lot of opinions or opinionated feelings. So this is just culled from the internet. So group files lawsuit in an effort to halt prairie dog extermination in Commerce City. With development and housing and building of malls, often these are on sites which are currently being occupied by prairie dogs, and often this can get some populations quite riled about what are we doing with the prairie dogs and where to move them. And then, as mentioned earlier, they aren't always the great thing. So they are a host species that is commonly afflicted by plague. And so in Commerce City, there was a rather large furore recently about prairie dogs or prairie dog fleas being found with plague. It shut down a fish concert, which can be considered a good thing or a bad thing. But the map that you showed, so the site that the prairie dogs had plague is visually you can see it from where we're working on this prairie dog project, which is in the middle of Denver. So they do cause problems. Plague is one of them, but I think plague seems to get an awful lot of press considering that very, very few people or dogs have actually been affected historically from prairie dogs as a source of plague. This is a dust storm. If you drive south from here, you'll go along this road. So this is a prairie dog colony where in the winter, when forage is low or the plant biomass is very reduced, you get these dust storms just drifting off the prairie dog colonies. So they do cause problems. And this is one of our sites. This is Bluff Lake in Denver. Does this work? Oh, here. Oops. So it's not the greatest picture to show it, but this is a nature center in the middle of Denver. And it's used hugely by people for recreation, for just walking and jogging and just getting out and seeing a green space. And right here is housing developments all around. And there's a gas station, and as a reporter recently said, this is prairie dogs suffering the effects of gentrification in the Front Range. There's no space for them to go. But the populations in these urban areas can be 5 times what they are in natural, unrestricted prairie dog colonies. So prairie dogs are existing at densities that is not normal. You can see here they've caused a lot of erosion, and this is a kind of a site where the managers of the nature reserve are really struggling with what to do because the populations keep increasing. They keep eroding more and more of the vegetation. They're having impacts upon some of the infrastructure of the paths and all that kind of thing. And they're housing residents who are really getting quite annoyed by prairie dogs encroaching on their land. So we have this nicely presented. I'm going to give you the case study here for prairie dogs. There are some non-lethal control options. One is relocation, so you can take them somewhere else. But now in the Front Range, there's nowhere for them to go. County borders are now restricted. You cannot move prairie dogs across counties without the commissioner's permission, and most counties will not accept prairie dogs from other counties. There's also a lot of controversy about relocation and what actually happens, whether it's successful. Because these are social animals living in little social groups, when you take them out and put them in new areas, are they just picked off? Are they very lonely and depressed? Not sure how great it works. There are also barriers, so people put up this kind of black matted sheeting. I'm always amused because when I drive to one of my sites early in the morning, I know if the prairie dogs are already up, because on the road side of the barrier, they're all sitting there alert, and then I go across the border to my study site where the prairie dog colony is supposed to be restricted by it. It's also very unsightly. Lethal control is another one, so poisoning or fumigation with gas. I'll talk about a little bit more about that in a second. Another one is raptor perches. So the Bluff Lake Nature Center has put up these raptor perches to encourage hawks to actually come and prey upon the prairie dogs, and it doesn't seem to have had a great effect. The poisoning and fumigation is why I'm here. So this whole study was kind of generated by concerned citizens in Denver. They had noticed that a housing development company had just come in and gassed all the prairie dogs, and they were quite annoyed because they actually enjoyed seeing prairie dogs whilst walking the dogs. They also didn't like seeing poison canisters where kids were playing nearby. And the housing development had no idea that anyone would actually like to have prairie dogs present. So their idea was, well, why don't we create a small prairie dog park so that we can have prairie dogs? To which every wildlife biologist said, that's not going to last, because in 2 years you will have too many prairie dogs and you will have a little arid dust bowl. So the reason we're here is that Patty Olson approached Colorado State University and others to create a group of people who might have possible ways of dealing with this. And I think someone misaddressed an email and I ended up at the table, and that's why I'm here now. So we have been trying a pilot study to use Gonacon, which was nicely described just now. So it's an immunocontraceptive. So if we can give this to prairie dogs, can we reduce the reproductive rates, see if that has an impact upon the population rate? So I'm not going to go into that overly. So this is how we do it. This is Jackson, one of the grad students working on the project. For those of you with eagle eyes, yes, this is a rabbit. And we didn't do our entire study on rabbits by accident. This was just us seeing if we could use this as a viable way. So we catch all the prairie dogs in these little tomahawk live traps. We use this handling cone, which if anyone is working with this kind of animal, they are fantastic. The animal goes in here, it can be restrained, and we can weigh it, and then carefully scruff it. So we don't have to use any anesthesia to do this process. Although it started off taking a few minutes, we can do this now with one person in about 3 minutes. It's pretty efficient. Individuals were captured last fall, so this is to try and give them the immunocontraceptive before the hormone cascade happens. It's 0.4 mil of Gonacon, or for experimental control, we've used a sham saline injection into the upper thigh, and just for the adult females, because we were worried that if we did it for the prairie dog males, then the territorial and the family structures could just dissolve. We've also given them all pit tags, so that's the individual markers just like you give to your cats or dogs for the vets, so that we can recognize every prairie dog subsequently. And this is a pilot study. So we have 3 matched pair sites. So we have sites that are near each other with similar kind of prairie dog colonies and similar habitats. So this is in Fort Collins. Here's kind of the main city of Fort Collins. We have 2 sites here, sham and Gonacon control. We have some in South Fort Collins, bordering housing developments. And then we have this one nature reserve in Denver where we actually just used the far ends of the colony. So one end got the injections and one got sham. And so we gave these in the last fall, and then Jackson and some other volunteers went out in the summer when the juveniles are emerging, so you can actually tell visually adult females versus offspring, and they've looked at counts of all the animals. So you can just visually scan with binoculars And we get these ratios here. So these are, in orange, are where we gave them the sham vaccine, and here we have in blue the ones with Gonicon. So obviously they did see some offspring. We didn't get every single female, but you can see, eyeballing it here, there's a nice decline in the numbers of offspring compared to the numbers of adults for these sites. So lower abundance of juveniles in Gonicon sites. Here's a visual count ratio. So this is just the numbers of juveniles that are seen. We've put all the matched, all the sites are grouped here. So here are the numbers of offspring seen in the sham sites, and here are the numbers of offspring in Gonicon. And so I think this is the second time in my entire career we actually have a p-value of less than p0 equals 0.005. So I'm over the moon. But you can see that Gonicon seems to have worked here. And remember, this is only 3 pilot sites. But it seems to be nicely working. So we've just finished, as of Friday, actually recapturing by hand captures all the animals that we could, because visual counts can often be deceiving if you're counting the same animal more than once. So here we have the 3 different matched pairs, and here, again, so blue is the numbers of offspring or juveniles from this year that we've found in Gonicon treated sites. So you can see here in Bluff Lake we have a nice decline, in Hogback's we have a nice decline, and then in South Fort Collins, which for those of us living in Fort Collins will be quite the joke, something strange is happening in South Fort Collins, but we didn't get offspring at either of the sites. We also had a real trouble getting any adults, and I'm not sure quite what is happening there. So again, lower abundance of juveniles in the Gonicon sites. So I'm going to give you some caveats. The fieldwork finished on Friday, so we have still yet to get really into the statistics of looking at this data. We have a bunch, like some of the sites have had more abundance of adults and whatever, so we're going to be able to look at the populations as they've, with real numbers. That begins in earnest soon. And the second part is blood analyses. We really were keen to take blood afterwards so that we could compare the shams and the controls and see what reproductive hormone titers were like. We have really struggled to get blood samples, in part because the sites where we have the sham vaccine, all the traps, when the traps are filled, they're filled with juveniles. So our sample size of re-caught adult females that were given the sham vaccine is about 2. So we struggled with getting that, and that's one of the things we'll have to discuss, whether we want to really concentrate and make a second effort. But in terms of the output, it seems to be that we're seeing fewer offspring. So as a management tool, I guess I would still sit on the fence until we've actually looked at our data a bit more carefully. Some models by Yoder et al. Have looked at these combinations of using contraception and culling, and seem to suggest that there are options. So if we can get 90% of the females every 3 years, we'll be able to have a nice sustainable population. And we think we've gotten that kind of level just in this pilot study. We also think it's probably going to more likely work, again, just like the kangaroo parallel in these discrete urban prairie dog colonies. So the Bluff Lake one is completely surrounded by urban land. So we see probably reduced immigration and emigration to other colonies. And that's probably where it's more likely realistic. And then this has to go through EPA product registration. So these data will be used to find out if this is a tool that can actually be adopted at a more widespread scale. Okay, so I just want to thank, obviously, the Botstiber Foundation and USDA and WRC, who've both provided funding for this. Bluff Lake, Fort Collins, EPA, and Colorado Parks and Wildlife, and then a bunch of volunteers who came out and did this of their own volition.